Good morning, everyone. So today we are presenting on police-free schools, ending the criminalization of Black and Brown youth. Here. All right, so a little bit about us as presenters. Angel Gober will be one of our presenters. She is the Western Pennsylvania Director of 1PA. Dr. Claire Cohen is a psychiatrist. And I am Gautam Makushi, and I'm a community advocate with the ACLU of Pennsylvania. And so as far as the process today, if you can feel free to chat. If you have questions, we will have 5 minutes in between each of our sections for any questions you have on that particular section. And then we will also have time for Q&A at the end. All right. So I wanted to start with this quote. To even begin to attack our destructive and punitive educational system, pedagogies that promote social justice must help educators understand and recognize America and its schools as spaces of whiteness, white rage, and white supremacy, all of which function to terrorize students of color. And this quote is taken from Dr. Bettina Love's book, We Want to Do More Than Survive. So getting into the current reality of what we're seeing at schools right now, and I wanted to give you a little bit of background and kind of look at some of the data and the policies. So police officers have become more ingrained in the fabric of education, and the line between disciplinary and criminal matters has grown increasingly blurry. So over the past 2 decades, the number of school-based police in the US and their roles have expanded. And with this increasing presence has come an increase in student arrests and referrals to law enforcement. And a referral is any time that the police are called on a student, whether that results in an arrest or not. So when we take into consideration some of the reasons that people will say that we need police in schools, school shootings is one of the top reasons given. But not only are they quite rare, but they have occurred at schools with and without armed law enforcement. And sometimes they've intervened, but in most situations, so for example, Columbine and Parkland, they have not. And in fact, Parkland brought about an interesting point to consider in the case of the police officer who didn't intervene. The court ruled later that he was not required to intervene, quoting, "Neither the Constitution nor state law impose a general duty upon police officers to protect individual persons from harm, even when they know that harm will occur." So if our goal is to hire police who will be martyrs and intervene, and again, there's no guarantee that they will, then the type of people who are going to be attracted to that type of job are going to be highly militarized, always looking for threats, and those are not the types of people that we want interacting with our students. Additionally, there isn't any conclusive evidence stating that when police are in schools, they reduce crime among students. So a 2016 study found that schools with police actually have higher rates of exclusionary discipline, such as out-of-school suspension, expulsions, as well as arrests. And evidence has shown us that the presence can mean increased rate for minor offenses, so disorderly conduct, simple assault, which results in a greater number of children than necessary being exposed to the juvenile justice system. And as we all know, youth of color are considerably more likely than white youth to experience these harms. We can't forget that implicit bias plays a role in school discipline when students of color are seen as threatening and are disproportionately punished and arrested. And despite all good intentions of police officers, they can make school climates less inclusive, reduce trust, and that undermines effective behavior management. So student misbehavior, including criminal behavior, is less likely in schools that have inclusive social climates. Schools where students feel valued, respected, listened to, and part of a community. Schools with adequate supports and resources. And racial disproportionality in these suspensions and arrests cannot be explained in differences in socioeconomic status or differential rates of misbehavior. There is no evidence that shows us that Black and brown kids misbehave more, but it does show that more severe punishments for less serious or subjective infractions. So for example, white students are often disciplined for clear, unambiguous violations, smoking, drugs, while Black and brown students are disciplined for offenses that are vague or ambiguous, insubordination, disorderly conduct. So I wanted to take a look at the data specifically for Allegheny County. And as you can see here for Allegheny County, 67% of all school-based arrests were of Black youth, even though Black youth only account for about 19% of the youth population. So this means that Black youth in Allegheny County are arrested at 8.5 times the rate of white youth. And then as we look specifically at school districts here on the right, you can see that regardless of what percentage of the student population are Black, they are disproportionately arrested in school districts across Allegheny County. So I wanted to focus a little bit more about Pittsburgh Public Schools, which is the largest school district in this region. And as we can see here, compared to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh Public Schools arrest students at 8 times the rate of Philadelphia Public Schools. And this is Philadelphia Public Schools is about 6 times the size of Pittsburgh. So breaking these arrests down a little further, we can see that 81% of all of those arrests are of Black youth, 37% Black girls, 44% Black boys. But additionally, 35% of all students arrested at PPS have a disability. So even though students with disabilities account for less than 20% of the population, and this is taking all of these things individually. If we were to combine them, then we would see that Black boys with a disability across the nation are arrested at much higher rates than any other group of students. So the most frequent charge listed is disorderly conduct. And disorderly conduct can include things like fighting, even verbal fights, obscene language, or gestures. So one thing I really wanted to talk about that I think a lot of people don't understand is summary citations. And although summary citations are given across the country, what I'm going to talk about is specific to Pennsylvania. So summary citations are similar to traffic tickets. They're issued for minor infractions, usually typical youth behavior, often categorized as disorderly conduct. So things like excessive noise, obscene gestures, language, sometimes even for vaping. And although it seems like a minor issue, they are actually harmful and can have long-term consequences. So for starters, they're adult criminal offenses. There is no distinction between juveniles or adults when it comes to citations as there are in arrests. So with a citation, youth are required to appear before a magistrate, and they are not provided legal counsel, so they may not understand what their rights are. If a student fails to appear to this hearing for any reason, they may be tried in absentia. So the trial can be conducted without them even being there. And they could appeal this within 30 days, but again, they're not offered legal counsel. So they don't know how to do this, or even that they can do it. Most summary citations typically result in fines. And this is how these minor infractions tend to escalate. So if youth are unable to pay these fines, they're then charged separately with a failure to comply charge and referred to juvenile justice. So in fact, failure to comply accounts for 1/3 of all referrals to juvenile justice within Allegheny County. So a child can get a citation for being too loud or cussing. And because they were unable to pay the fine related to that citation, they are now charged with a failure to comply, essentially punishing poverty. And summary convictions are not automatically expunged until 6 months. They're not automatically expunged, and then they can't be expunged until somebody turns 18. So 6 months after turning 18, if all conditions have been met, then you can request that it be expunged. But if it's 17 or 18, you apply for a job, college, or military application, and you're asked if you've ever been convicted of a crime, you have to say yes, even if that summary citation was for vaping or for cussing. And I do want to say that with summary citations, there is no age limit. So with arrests in Pennsylvania, you have to be at least 10. With summary citations, we have seen one issued to, I think it was a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old for fighting, and it was clear that they were related. So there is no age limit for summary citations. In the city of Pittsburgh, we have more summary citations issued by Pittsburgh Public Police than by city police. And 88% of all summary citations are issued to Black youth. Black boys are cited at 6 times the rate of white boys, and Black girls are cited at 11 times the rate of white girls. So given this, it should not be controversial to say that racial disproportionality does not develop by accident or coincidence. It is at least partially the result of institutionalized racism and implicit or explicit biases. So looking forward, what needs to change? So the first thing is that all school policies and practices need to be structured to prevent the criminalization of Black and brown youth. All policies must be reviewed with this goal in mind. For example, the code of conduct. So anybody can do this for the school district. You would look at your code of conduct, look for language that is vague or subjective, and demand that your school board and your school district ensure language is clear and remove subjective language. This is particularly important because of normative baselines. So whiteness is considered the racial norm. So seemingly neutral decision-making and behavioral evaluation criteria are not in fact race neutral. And when considering that 80% of all school teachers are white, it's easy to see why there's racial disproportionality in school discipline, especially as it pertains to offenses like defiance or disrespect, because these categories are vague and inherently normative. Another thing school districts can do is look at their memorandum of understanding between the school districts and local police. So this is an agreement that is required by state law in Pennsylvania that all school districts have to have an MOU between their district and whatever their local law enforcement is. But they can rewrite their MOU to ensure that there are guidelines so that there's a shared understanding of the roles and responsibilities in maintaining safe schools, and set guidelines for when police should and should not be involved in discipline, not in discipline, in something that actually requires police intervention. Districts have a responsibility to support student learning and minimize contact between students and police, and to clearly delineate for schools when they should and shouldn't call them. So as far as school safety and policing, districts that value Black and brown youth don't have metal detectors. They don't have constant surveillance. If you look at school districts in the suburbs that are predominantly white, most don't have metal detectors. They don't have cameras and police and security guards all roaming the halls and the buildings at all times. And while Angel will talk a little bit more about police-free schools at the end, districts can utilize many alternatives to police to ensure safety. So they can use mediators, mentors from the community, violence interrupters to address behavioral issues. I will say that as school districts across the country push for police-free schools, we should not assume that security guards will be a safer alternative or rely more on security guards, as we recognize that in many districts, young girls, particularly girls of color, have experienced sexual harassment by security guards who still represent authority figures in their lives. One last thing is that when districts are looking at safety options and the role of police and security guards, and one thing that I have heard repeatedly is that those police officers and the security guards are the only adult that student trusts, and so we need them in the building. But police or security guards should not be the only trusted adult in a building. And if they are, it is a reflection of that school. It means that that school has failed that child, that they don't have the supports that that child needs, that there isn't another adult that the child trusts. So police and security guards should not be filling that role. And if they are, it means that the school has failed. All right. I have some resources here. When we send all of these out, you will have a copy of this slide with the links, so you don't need to take notes. But I will now I'll see if there's any questions, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Cohen. And if there aren't any questions, I will move on to. All right. Okay, Dr. Cohen, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so first, I'm a child psychiatrist and I've been practicing for over 35 years at this point. And one of the major issues that has in psychiatry is trauma, because it's become clear that trauma, especially in the United States, has a major impact on children's mental health. It's a very frequent experience for Americans. The most recent studies, these are mainly studies spearheaded out of the CDC, looking at surveys, looking at hundreds of thousands of people around the country. And from these, it's clear that 70% of American adults report having had at least one traumatic event in their life. And let me backtrack a bit. What is trauma or traumatic event? Thank you, first of all. So trauma is an experience in which a person either feels that they themselves, their physical integrity, or their life is threatened, okay? Physical integrity means you could be seriously injured. It's threatened, or someone you love, their physical integrity or life is threatened, or people that are around you in your environment, you perceive that their life is or physical integrity is threatened. And the word perceived is important because it doesn't have to be for sure that you could be threatened. So yes, a tornado, being in the middle of a tornado or having a gun to your head is trauma, but also trauma can be your mother's being physically assaulted by someone and you as a child perceive that she could be killed, or that you're ganged up on by policemen or they put you in handcuffs and you perceive that you could be harmed. So anytime you perceive the threat to your life or to your physical integrity, that's a trauma. It doesn't always cause PTSD, but that is a traumatic experience. So as I said, 70% of adults in the United States have experienced at least one traumatic event. And of those adults, 85% of them, their experience of trauma was in childhood. So childhood trauma in our society is very common. When you look at trauma in children, about 33% or about a third of those traumatic experiences come from community violence, which includes experiences with the police. The rest of those are from experiences in the home, okay? Some of that community violence is in our schools. And I have this saying from Arnie Duncan in which he says, it's clear that we're severely underestimating the traumatic impact our children in our country are being subject to, and we compound it by the experiences they have in school. Now, what does this have to do with Black and brown children? Part of the reason why American children are so subject to violence and to trauma is because in our society, it has been okay for children of color, for Black and brown children, since the beginning of this country to be subjected to traumatic experiences. Slavery, from slavery to Jim Crow, to lynchings, to separating children from their families today, okay? And from police brutality. So once a society says it's okay for some children to be traumatized, to not be protected, to not be kept safe, it's very easy for a slippery slope to develop where all children are subjected to trauma and safety. You can't have some children that society feels should be nurtured and taken care of and being kept safe, and others that aren't, and have that not affect the whole society. So next slide. Oh, you skipped one. Okay, thank you. So we hear a lot about how police in schools makes everybody feel safer. Okay, so because everybody with all these shootings is scared and somewhat traumatized and needs a feeling of safety. So there have been some studies, California, Maryland, and a few other places around the country that looked at, do people feel safer in schools? Do kids, do staff? And what these studies have shown is that actually the majority of Black kids don't feel safer by having an officer in school, and significant proportions of Latino and white kids also don't feel safer. They feel, and many kids feel threatened or unsafe. The people who feel safe, and studies after studies show that, are the staff. And these studies haven't looked at this, but I would like to say that part of the reason why the staff feel safer is because the staff are predominantly white, and that many of these kids, and there we have predominantly white staff dealing with, in some cases, predominantly white, Black or brown students, and that implicit bias that somehow Black and brown bodies are threatening makes people feel less safe, although staff may not be willing to admit this to themselves or others. But I would like to see a study looking at that. Now, there have been studies looking at police perceptions of what the dangers are in urban schools versus schools that are predominantly white, and predominantly Black schools versus predominantly white schools. And disturbingly, when police are in predominantly white schools, they view the threats as being outside the school, not the students. They view that the students need to be protected, the students in the school, from threats outside, whereas studies show that police in schools that have a large Black population, especially in urban schools, view the threat as being the students themselves. So that right there, if you think about it, that's a disturbing bit of information to see. The police are coming into schools and they're viewing the students themselves as the threat. So you can look at that fact and extrapolate as to why in schools in Allegheny County, you're seeing all these Black kids being targeted to and criminalized because they're being perceived as the actual threat. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay. So when we look at trauma and how trauma impacts children, we now know that trauma isn't just all in your head and just an emotional experience. We know that when children are traumatized, it affects their developmental outcome, it affects their academic performance, it affects their physical body. This is why people who have experienced trauma in childhood have an increased risk for hypertension, diabetes, and other illnesses, because it's actually the impact of trauma on the body is very physical, and the impact of trauma on development is very powerful, and the impact of trauma on academic functioning is very powerful. And when children are stressed from trauma, their behavior increases, their behavioral disturbance increases. You have a kid who's feeling traumatized, they're more likely to fight, they're more likely to curse, they're more likely to threaten, they're more likely to bite, kick, all these things. Okay, so let's translate that to what happens in school. So you have children in school, a significant proportion of whom have already been traumatized from things outside of school. They come into school, and we know that compounding trauma, compounding feelings of unsafeness makes things worse, not better. Some of these children have even been traumatized by police already. They come into school, and here they are in an environment that does not make them feel more safe, makes them feel more threatened, more insecure, more at risk to be harmed. And in some cases, they are actually harmed. There have been studies that have shown that when a police exhibits undue physical force in a school setting, many of the students that witness that are traumatized, okay? Many of the students that witness that then go on to have the symptoms themselves. So what happens? So you come into the school and there's the police. In the school, kids are feeling less safe. So you see higher rates of behavior problems. You see lower academic achievement, because kids can't learn when they're not feeling safe, when they're feeling hypervigilant, when they're feeling like they have to watch their back. You see poor developmental outcomes because of the behavior problems. You see higher rates of discipline, but because there's police there, and studies once again have shown that when you have police, you're more likely to use things like suspensions and referral to juvenile justice for behavior than other means of controlling behavior. So you have higher rates of exclusionary discipline, and you have increased rates of dropouts, because when kids don't like being in school, when they feel unsafe and unwanted there, and when they're frequently being suspended, and when they're not achieving, there's an increased rate of dropout. So all of this, people should be asking themselves, why are we having police in schools? It's clear that it's not making things better. It's making things worse. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to listen to this little video.
We talk about trauma-informed schools. Really what we are describing is the awareness that educators, administrators, and other school personnel have of the impact of trauma on students in terms of behavior, in terms of relationships, in terms of ability to regulate internal states and how that manifests in the classroom. Ultimately, trauma-informed schools understand and recognize that children's behavior is a developmental response to past experience, so that instead of wondering what's wrong with a child or immediately beginning to label, we start to ask the question, what might have happened that explains this child's behavior? And all of a sudden, when we do that, understanding can manifest, and we can begin to address the underlying needs that the child may have. When we think about components of a trauma-informed school, it's important, and I think very helpful, to look at sort of a multi-tiered approach. So what's happening universally on the school campus? What kinds of positive behavior intervention and supports are in place to support all students and support a healthy, safe, and compassionate school climate? What kinds of supports are in place in terms of teaching social emotional learning? And how do we begin to recognize that in a trauma-informed school environment, all children are supported regardless of trauma history? Often we may not know who of the student body has been exposed, but certainly if we're providing a safe and sane and secure and caring climate, it will ultimately support all students. As we move up into the secondary tier or that selective level, what we begin to see are small groups that can effectively address some of the symptoms of child trauma, as well as some disciplinary policies through dean's offices, et cetera, that begin to take into account some of the child's past experience and move beyond simply a disciplinary or punitive standpoint. Certainly, programs such as restorative justice can make a big difference. And then at the indicated level or the tertiary level of care, how do we begin to either provide those mental health services through district initiatives or partner with outside agencies to be able to provide the one-on-one mental health services necessary to support students who have been exposed to trauma and are presenting with significant symptomatology?
Okay. So I like this because it says very clearly what the concept of trauma-informed schools are about. So it's basically what it's meaning is that instead of viewing children as these dangerous enemies and trying to control their behavior through punitive means and creating a hostile environment, which exacerbates children's behavior, doesn't improve it, we need to look at how our schools are approaching children in a way that would not only not traumatize children, not exacerbate trauma, but give children a warm, a caring environment, a sanctuary environment for all children. And this would be the best means to help our children. This would be in the best interest of our children. It would improve their learning. It would decrease behavior problems. And we're not going to do this with police. So what are some of the things we need to do? First of all, we need to be aware that a significant proportion of American children, and disproportionately children of color, have been victims of trauma already. And we don't know, as he said in the little video, we don't know who that is. And it's not the job of teachers to try to figure out who that is. But if we come into, if the people running schools, if the parents, if the communities, if the school staff have that awareness, then they're going to have a school atmosphere which is going to take that into account, which is going to be helpful for all children, not just children who have been traumatized. So one of the things is having increased social workers and counselors. And these are the recommended ratios by our government school. When I say our government, I mean our state government's school safety task force. And here's the reality of what you have. As you can see already, we're behind in what we should have. So we need those social workers and counselors, because they are people who have a training and an awareness, who can help us to be aware of which children are victims of trauma. So when a child, for example, has been a victim of any kind of trauma, from police violence in the community to violence in the home, they're going to be more hyper vigilant. They're going to be more ready to curse, to threaten, to fight. So we need to be aware that a significant proportion of those kids, that's an issue for them. So when we're addressing a kid who's repeatedly struggling with those kind of behaviors, they're also, by the way, going to be more likely to have symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So when we're having a child like that, instead of just trying to respond punitively, which makes them worse, we need to be having enough counselors and social workers that children can be assessed, and we can try to get clear of those children. That's secondary and tertiary tiers that they were talking about in the video. Which of those are ones that need some extra support and help? Also, for all children, learning how to manage and handle conflict and anger will help more than anything else to decrease disciplinary problems in school. Punitive approaches do not, and I could give you a whole lecture on that one. But we know that when children, so little boys and little girls, young children frequently get aggressive and fight when they're upset, when they're angry, when they have conflict. That's not uncommon. Getting children citations and getting them into the juvenile justice system, there have been studies going back to the early 1900s which show that that doesn't work. It makes things worse. But teaching children how to resolve conflict, teaching children restorative justice practices, and modeling those for children, that's what we know works. Also teaching children how to regulate strong feelings through meditation and yoga. There were two schools in Baltimore, two elementary, one was an elementary, one was an elementary combination, elementary middle school, that implemented that as a program for the whole school body. Their rate of absenteeism dropped dramatically. The rate of satisfaction in school increased and improved. The rate of behavioral problems dropped, and academic performance increased. So, and these are things that children enjoy learning as well, but they're also valuable techniques and valuable tools for children. Recess. I've cured some kids of problems at school, and I should put in their naps also for very young children. But recess, there's been lots of studies worldwide that show that children actually do better academically when they have periods where they can run and jump and play. That helps them get out excess energy, that helps them deal with frustration. And it also helps them grow better, because children need that for their bodies to develop, actually physically develop. And it also, not just in terms of decreasing obesity, but also for their bones to grow right and their muscles to grow right. So recess is important. Music and arts, and so many schools have taken those out. But once again, there's lots of studies that have shown that music and the arts help children process their experience, and particularly children who are traumatized. It helps them not only self-regulate, but helps them find healthy means of expressing their life experiences, whether stressful or not. So these are things that we as adults, we need to be looking at what we know works and doesn't work. These are the things that are what we need for children in the schools. All right, next slide. Okay, so that's my last slide. So what I'm hoping to end with, what I'm hoping people get out of this, yes, we have problems in our society. Our children experience a phenomenal level of stress and trauma. And that is impacting how children function in school, both behaviorally, socially, and academically. We all want to see things go better. We want to help children. And how do we do that? What are the things that we know will help the environment for all children, not just Black or brown children? And what are the things that we know? And these are things that are not new. I can go back and show you studies from the 1900s, from the early 1900s. We've known that the punitive, militaristic policing approach is harmful, and it does not improve situations. We've known this for decades. So we need to push, as parents in the communities, we need to push our schools to implement programs that help, not harm children. And we need to be aware of the fact that in our country, so many children are already traumatized. And as I said, predominantly Black and brown, but disproportionately, I should say, Black and brown. And that if we want to have schools where children thrive and develop and do well, then we need to look at what has been shown to be helpful for children and get out of this mindset that, oh, the police are the answer for everything. Okay.
Are there any questions on this part? Any questions for Dr. Cohen before we move on to Angel?
Dr. Cohen, there was a few questions in the chat. Would you like me to read them to you, or?
Sure, go ahead.
So the first is from Sandy. So what is the status of PPS and moving toward these proactive approaches? What are the barriers?
So I'll ask Gada to help me, and if Angel is here, she can also too. But
well, actually, yeah, Dr. Cohen, I would say that Angel might be addressing some of this in her the next section. So maybe we'll table that for now, and if that question's not fully answered, we can come back to it at the end.
Sure, okay. And the next question?
Sure, there was one about the ratios. Those ratios still seem pretty high, 250 to 1 for counselors and social workers. I'm not a counselor or social worker, but that seems overwhelming. Are those recommended ratios proven to be effective, or are there studies that show that even lower ratios would be better?
And that's an excellent question. And when I first saw those ratios myself, I felt like you did. So always lower ratios are better always. But I think that task force was trying to be realistic of what could be realistically done. But yes, of course, having a ratio, let's say having 200 to 1 or 100 even to 1 would be even better. In general, the lower the ratio throughout mental health, I can tell you the lower the ratio, the better. But I think those are saying that at the very least, you have to have those, that above those, it's ineffective. You can't really address issues at all. And definitely in schools where there's a lot of children, in individual schools where there's a high volume of kids who have been traumatized, these ratios would be inadequate. And Angel, I see is down here, she can give you the statistics of what the actual ratios are in Pittsburgh public schools at this point. Any other questions for me?
Yes, there was one more from Veronica. Your presentation sounded like it was largely focused on young people. Are there any differences as we think about high school aged youth?
Well, actually, I had read a couple of studies looking at high school age youth. For high school age youth, the rate of community violence, as you get older, the rate of trauma from community violence increases. As one gets older, so therefore in high school, the rate of the chances of that violence being from the police. In fact, studies of children being traumatized by police are mostly from high school students of high school age. And definitely dropout rates. Most of that children usually don't drop out in elementary school. Most of the dropping out from school occurs at the high school level. I'm not aware at this point of any of the schools that I know that implemented meditation and yoga. They were all either elementary or middle schools. I'm not aware of, but I'm sure there are some of high schools that implemented those programs, but I do know that they were definitely effective for middle school and elementary school, have been shown to be effective for middle and elementary school kids. The studies looking at the impact on academic performance is at all grade levels. One interesting question that I after you've asked this question, I'm going to see what information is on that. Is the rate of substance abuse increased in kids, in high school kids that are traumatized? That would be an interesting thing to look at. Okay.
Right, so we're gonna move on to Angel, and then we will have time for more Q&A after this section.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't figure out how to move my screen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Angel Gober. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Western PA Director with One Pennsylvania. Just a quick short summary of who One PA is. I see we have some members on here and some allies, so good morning to you all. But One PA is a statewide membership-based organization. We work on all of the buckets of injustice, from housing to education to economics and politics and the environment. We focus primarily on education and environmental justice on our side of the state. Our good sisters and brothers over in Philadelphia are on the streets, working hard to change housing policy and worker rights policies in the city of Philadelphia. And so I'm excited to talk to you all this morning because everyone knows that my baby is education. And, I started doing this work around 6 years ago. Pam Harbin and Miss Paulette Foster are co-founders of the Education Rights Network. And somehow I don't know if they adopted me in or kidnapped me in, but now I'm stuck in it. So now I'm super committed to and passionate around making sure that especially Black kids are not being pushed out of their education and being supported and loved and welcomed into their place where they're supposed to receive their academics. So that's who we are. So you can move on. There's some cute pictures of some of our actions. Okay, here's some of our campaigns. So this picture right here is one of our members in their cute little girl Trinity. She is a PPS student, and there's little Mama in the background. She goes to Obama. So some of the campaigns that we focus under the education umbrella are around community schools. We focus on decreasing or ending suspensions for students. And so it's interesting, in the time of George Floyd, we saw a lot of people come out and hit the streets and started demanding for police-free communities and police-free schools, but we called it Counselors Not Cops. So it's now being rebranded to Police-Free Schools. So that's one of our campaigns as well. Ending school privatization. We understand that the expansion of charter schools is like a hemorrhage point to funding for public education. So we're spending a lot of money on expanding charter schools, and it actually comes out of the same bucket of public education. So our traditional public schools lose money every time we open a new charter school, which is problematic. School funding is always an issue at the state level, at the local level. I'll talk about some of that later. Electing school board members. We understand that there are, people that enter into lawmaker space for certain reasons or have certain agendas. But here at 1PA, we're really, really clear on like what our top priorities are around public education. So we actually are an endorsing organization, so we can endorse candidates that are aligned with our education morals. So we actually always want to support school board members that, you know, rock with these issues. For the last year, we've had a lot of issues around e-learning and the transition to remote learning. So we've done a ton of work on that, you know, just from helping deliver devices to families to, you know, figure out how to get families into learning hubs who can't sit at home and help their kids, you know, on the computer and have to go to work. So there's many, many areas, you know, of concern around e-learning, but, you know, I always tell people it is what it is. It's like, we are not the only school district that suffers around online learning. Like every school district across the country has issues. Like there's not one perfect model because everyone had to figure, if we had 20 years to plan an e-learning system, maybe, but we all had to do it last minute because of the pandemic. And then special education, of course, know your rights work. We work with families who have students with IEPs or disabilities, special education, making sure that our most vulnerable students are not pushed out, and they usually are the ones that are pushed out. Making sure that, you know, families know that it is the law and it is your right for school districts to provide services for your baby if that's what's needed. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So a lot of campaigns. So what we've won since we've been at it. So we passed a community schools policy back in 2016, which was exciting. We had brought in a whole slew of new school board members. I think it was Maura Kalida, Dr. Holly, Kevin Carter, and I think at the time Linda Wren. And everyone was excited about community schools, and we were super eager. And so we actually got a policy passed pretty quickly when the new school board was sworn in. And I will talk a little bit about what sustainable community schools are a little bit later. But now we currently have 8 community schools. And so what separates a community school from a regular school is you actually have an assigned full-time site coordinator in every building. So that coordinator is supposed to work with parents, teachers, school staff, outside community agencies to figure out how we can provide the right supports for that particular school. We passed the suspension ban, which was huge, the first in the state, eliminating the suspensions for nonviolent offenses from pre-K to 2nd grade. The school police a couple of years ago tried to carry guns. We said, hell no, that's not happening here. We also have been very invested in community schools. I believe Sandy Woolley's on here, shout out to her, but we co-authored the administrative regulations for the superintendent on how to implement community schools. You know, that is like our baby, and it was a huge thing to pass. So we wanted to make sure that they mess it up. So we said, we'll give you the guide on how we're actually going to implement these community schools. For the last few years, we have been doing needs assessment from parents. So when you open up a community school, you have to identify what the need is, right? And every community has different needs. So we have actually gone door to door in the snow, in the cold, in the rain, and we will continue because we know how to talk to parents. A lot of times the district, they're not really good at it, or they're not resourcing that department, right? So it's like, we want community schools to work so bad, we'll put up our own resources, we'll find our parents and our own members will go knock those doors and sit on those couches of those parents and find out what their needs and issues are. So we've done that a couple times, knocked on many doors. And I can't see the bottom of the screen. Why can't I see the bottom of the screen? I think that's it. Is that it? Remote learning, harmless grading policy. Oh, so when we first started, when we first transitioned into e-learning or remote learning, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't easy for school staff to push kids out of that learning as well. So we wanted to make sure that kids are not going to be like penalized. We wanted to make sure that if you had barriers to sitting in front of a computer all day, whether that's access to the internet, whether that's a child care issue, whether you have parents that also have disabilities that can't help you walk you through your academics on a daily basis, or you're just not showing up, you're not logging on, that you would be held harmless. So everyone would get a C and we would move on, because it's not these little babies' fault that there's a national pandemic, a global pandemic happening. So that's what that is. Right. So we had a couple wins. I guess we're doing pretty good. So this is the community, this is just an example of one of the Saturday mornings. You see Pam's there with her blonde hair, Miss Paulette's over to her right, Mr. Jerry. We all showed up to go knock on doors in the East End. So that was Faison, Westinghouse, and Lincoln, who at the time were newer community schools. And we actually had, I think we had the assistant superintendent show up. And he was like, what are we supposed to do? I said, we're going to go knock on doors. And he said, well, what are we supposed to do? I said, you're supposed to have a conversation and talk to these parents and find out what supports they need. It's that simple. We do this all the time. So they were actually quite shocked to see, like, this is the level of engagement that we do. Like, we meet people where they're at. And I purposely sent him up in the projects to get him a quick learning lesson on how our people are. So that was quite interesting. And okay, so police-free schools. See, God is making me move fast. So we actually have sent a series of recommendations to the school district this year and last year, specific to the district's budget. And so we are quickly trying to get the district to divest from policing and invest in supports and services. So these are just some of the demands that we asked for. That we wanted to get rid of the 22 cops. We don't want to have, and then people always say, like, well, if you get rid of school police, then the door is wide open to the Pittsburgh police. No. We don't want that either. Like, there should be like a hardcore process in which police come. Police should only come if somebody is bleeding or dying, right? Police should not come if a kid calls a teacher a curse word, or there's some kind of fight or disruption. Like, that's why you still have security guards to do that. But to be clear, we're not talking about security guards. We're talking about the school police officers who actually can arrest and press charges on students. And then, there's some buckets. There's some other buckets of systems of policing. We understand it's just not police. There are other policies that are harmful to students. The ALICE training, we spent a lot of money on that, the active shooter training, which is, traumatizing to our students and our teachers. So that's one thing that we would like to get rid of. We want to stop police officers from continuing to frivolously issue citations. That's why we have, the most Black girls that are arrested. Of course, Gotta talked about that in this city than any other city in the state. And then we need some full transparency. Like, what does it even mean? What happens? What is a process when a kid gets arrested? Who calls the cops first? Who makes that decision? Are there restorative steps that you take before you immediately call the police? You can skip to the next one. So we have full copies of all of this. If people want it, I can send it to you with no problem. If you put your email in the chat, I can send you all this stuff. So of course, divest from policing, investing in supports and services. I know somebody asked earlier, like the ratio from counselors to students, that's overwhelming. So we have 92 employed to this day, school security and police officers. We only have 78 counselors and social workers. So we still have more police than we do counselors and social workers, which is a problem. And so, if we could figure out how to eliminate some of those positions and actually put more resources in the school, that would actually be, an investment in our students. Let me see those. You can skip to the next one. I can send this to people. I'm not going to read it to you. Okay, so Suspension ban is important. What we're looking forward to in 2021, 2022 school year is we actually want to expand the suspension ban to the 5th grade for nonviolent offenses, lower infractions. Standardized testing, I hope that that's not happening during e-learning because that would be detrimental to our school district. A lot of standardized tests determine, are they use that as the marker of whether they close schools or not? And we all know that those tests can be biased. And we also know that due to, classroom sizes, like a lot of times kids get to those standardized tests and never learn the material because teachers are overwhelmed, there's too many students and they're on a track to teach, like they didn't get to that point where they taught them that yet. So we absolutely need more teachers of color. Kids need to see, they need to be able to relate to the people that are leading them through life. We agree with that 100%. Ending restraints and seclusion, adequate and equitable school funding. Yeah, so we always need more funding. We need money for special education. We need less money for policing. Every year, the school district in December, they approve their budget. So we always show up at their public hearing, which is usually in the middle of the day, which is problematic because people are at work, and you give your testimony around the budget, which is really hard to read. So we actually have a condensed version because our parents are really smart. And we actually have combed through the budget and said, here are the areas that we need you to get rid of. And here is what we want you to invest in. So we have a very concrete set of demands and recommendations that are specific to Pittsburgh Public Schools budget. Okay, next. And how to get involved. Oh, I guess I didn't get to talk about more things, but I am always available. We have monthly Education Rights Network meetings. They're on Zoom now. We actually have a big all-in meeting coming next Saturday, the 30th. So this is actually be a good time to come to the organization because we're going to have our statewide members meeting to talk about all the campaigns, to connect with people in Philadelphia, to understand what's happening with them. They understand what's happening with us. And you get a little snapshot of all of the campaigns that we're working on. So it's this Saturday, January 30th at 12 noon. You can follow us on Facebook. The event is on Facebook and register there. We are on all of the Twitters and Instagrams. We're trying to figure out TikTok and Snapchat for some of us older folks, but we want to figure out how to incorporate young people into this work as well. And those are the social media sites that they use. So thank you so much. I'm probably over time, but if you want to hear like more details about our campaigns and how to get involved, please just check us out. I'll put my email in the chat. And yeah, thank you. Good morning.
All right. Thank you, Angel and Dr. Cohen. And I will give Dr. Cohen and Angel a chance for any last minute thoughts a little bit later, but I wanted to open up for chat and conversation if anyone has any questions on anything that's been covered. I think you are all able to either unmute yourself or raise your hand, so please do so.
And it would be nice to see some people's faces. We have a rule at 1 p.m. You're not allowed to be on Zoom without showing your face, but I understand it's a Saturday morning, so.
And Jay, I see that you have your hand up, so you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Oh, I'm calling people on the carpet. I know that's right. Good morning.
Jay or Jess, both of you have your hand up. If either of you want to unmute and ask a question.
Jay, you can go first if you're.
I think, Jay, unmute yourself. You're mute too, Gotta. So.
Well, Jess, go ahead. Since you're unmuted, you can ask a question. Go ahead.
I was wondering if you could talk about the status of the campaign to remove the 22 police officers from PPS schools.
Sure. So we are kind of in a muddy place right now. So we have 9 sitting school board members. I think we only have 3 that fully support police-free schools. The good thing, the blessed thing, is that we still have a process in which we can elect our school board members. And a lot of other cities, school board members are appointed, which is problematic, by the mayor or whomever else, the governor. But in our city, we can still elect school board members. So we actually want to make sure, moving into this primary in May, that we have people running for school board that understand and appreciate that we cannot exist with police in our schools. That's too harmful to children. It's too close. So I think we don't have the votes right now, Jess, to actually put a policy in place to eliminate those 22 police officers. What we have offered is phasing them out or changing their job titles, because a lot of people are like, those are people's jobs. Fine, that's fine. We can give them a new job. They can be a peacekeeper. A lot of them claim to be mentors or big brothers and uncles anyway, right? That's what they claim. So we should figure out how to put them in a different position where they actually can't, put harm on our students, arrest them, press charges, cause trauma, whatever. So there's a couple different versions, but we are really looking to hopefully in the next year get a new school board that supports our issues of actually just eliminating those positions.
There was a question in the chat about whether teachers are more willing to report issues and punish them when police are in the schools. And yes, there are not just higher rates of exclusionary discipline because of that, but police are generally the one role in the school that isn't assigned something else. And so they are the most available. And so oftentimes they are the first person or the default person that a teacher will call in for additional support. And because police really don't get adequate training in dealing with students, especially youth with disabilities, they can escalate and they tend to escalate. And so it could be something very minor that then escalates to an arrest, or they think they're doing you a favor by just giving you a citation. So yes, police in schools definitely increase the rate of referrals and arrests.
And I would like to add to that, a lot of times people look to police as authorities on how to handle behavior, but police have no training in child development and child psychology, but they're very quick to give inappropriate advice. I've had that happen to many of my patients where the people turn to the police for advice and were given very inappropriate advice on how to handle behaviors. And so that it's not, so people will turn to them for advice, they'll turn to them for help. And also, even if they don't turn to them, it seems like from what I've read, it changes the whole focus of the environment in the school on how to handle behaviors. So now even when police aren't being called, there's a more punitive approach.
And Karina and Kevin, I will get to you. I just want to make sure, Sandy, you had put the question about the status of PPS. Did you want did Angel answer that? Do you want more clarification on what they're doing? Yes, okay. So they've put together a school safety task force right now that is, I think, just had their first meeting. So even though I am a part of different organizations like the Black Girls Equity Alliance, and we released a report showing the rate of arrests and referrals and how high it is in Pittsburgh public schools, they have determined that they would like additional data. They would like to do their own analysis before moving forward. And one thing I think that we didn't state is that police officers are part of the teachers union. And so the teachers union actually fights very hard to ensure that police do not lose their jobs and that they are still in the schools. So that is another barrier. And I think with the current school board member, and I think this was mentioned, with the current school board members we have, there aren't enough votes, there aren't enough advocates to be able to remove police right now. And Karina, I think I will go to you first and then Kevin.
Well, Jay's back. Jay was next.
Oh, okay. All right, Jay.
Sorry about that. My question, and apologies if this was asked already, but what's happening with school board elections for this year? You know, you talked about engaging in school board elections. Everyone's talking about judges, mayor, but school board is so important. Could someone speak?
Yeah, so we will always play in school board races. We are all intertwined in it like an infectious disease, honey. That is the game that we are going to play. The problem is we have 5 seats that are up. Saladin seat, Terry Kennedy, Cindy Falls, Sylvia Wilson, and Veronica Edwards. All 5 of those seats are up. Now, it's hard to say which ones are for police and schools and which ones aren't. I mean, I can tell you, but you can message me or whatever. But we also, so our members really conduct those interviews. And I'm just letting you know right now, like if you apply for the 1PA endorsement and you talking about you want to keep cops in school, like we're not going to support you. So we really want to make sure that we have new people running for those seats that are aligned with getting rid of cops, thinking about solutions to conflict instead of punishing kids and throwing them out like trash and they made a mistake, right? So if you have that mindset, do not apply for our endorsement because that's not how we roll. So Jay, we are still, looking, we're gonna, I think the petition period is in February, so we won't know until like the end of February who's actually running. And if they got their paperwork together and all that, because that's like a whole process. But yeah, so we are looking to endorse and we will have activities for that. So our first political committee actually is this week because we saw the Ed Gainey announced and, the city council races and judges races. There's Black women that are running for judge for the first time in Allegheny County, which is exciting. So yes, that's what we're doing for school board.
All right, Karina?
Hi, actually that answered like a large part of the question that I was gonna ask. I'm just trying to get a better sense of how I can, make sure that I'm helping by voting in people who are gonna be making changes and other things. And I think part of where my question stemmed is that I've been trying to write to my school board members and stuff more frequently, asking for some of these things and letting them know my priorities. But I was receiving responses back from my school board members that were pretty patronizing and kind of just saying, you just misunderstand. We don't actually have police in our schools. And I wasn't sure if that's just like sort of twisting vocabulary or if it's just a flat out lie, because to me I didn't really know how to respond to that.
Can I ask you who replied? Was it one person?
To be honest, I cannot remember the specific name of my school board member, but I live on the north side in Perry Hilltop.
Okay.
I could look it up.
Yeah, so there are
Kevin
police.
Kevin Carter is your school board member.
Yeah, there are 20 school police officers, and they are stationed, 9 of them are stationed in the high schools. So every high school has a police officer stationed in the school. And then the other 11 roam and are called or check in when needed. So we absolutely do have police officers at PPS that are employed by the district. And Kevin?
Thank you.
Thank you all for this entire workshop. I learned a lot here. I was really curious about what the pipeline looks like for addressing that ratio that Dr. Cohen shared about like counselors and nurses and in schools, and that ratio of those professionals to students. So like, are local schools and universities like training enough people to put those folks into like PPS and things like that? I was just really interested in what that looks like right now. If anything is happening.
Oh, you mean like a specific effort to bringing more staff into PPS?
Yeah, increasing like that number so that ratio of like counselors and psychologists in schools will go down. Like, is there actually even enough support for schools to be able to hire people into that? And like, how are like universities or other programs that are training those people working with schools to get those folks in?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think University of Pitt has some kind of program. I mean, I know that like it's a national issue that we don't have Black educators actually in schools. A lot of Black educators have been pushed out. Like, 99% of our workforce is white women. And so I can't speak on the higher level of academia to figure out if there's any like programs that are, I don't know.
So in terms of mental health, there is a grave shortage of Black mental health professionals. And of the ones that are available, they're overwhelmingly women. I can't say the exact statistics for other fields, but I know in psychiatry, two-thirds of the Black child psychiatrists are women. And women can do a good job too, but there's a very grave, and I actually, this is a long time ago, in the mid 80s, I was on American Psychiatric Association task force to determine how many Black psychiatrists, child psychiatrists there were in the country. So I can tell you that in 1987, there were exactly only 100 Black child psychiatrists in the whole United States. So we were rare. At that time, I knew every single one. I know there are more. I've tried to track the statistics, and the best I can tell you is there's maybe 200 now. There's not a lot more, maybe 2, maybe 3, but it's a very grave shortage. And it still is that 66% are women of Black child psychiatrists. Now, I don't know, I'm not as clear on the statistics for psychologists and social workers, but I do know from what I have read that once again, there's a grave shortage. So that's part of the problem. And one of the issues in terms of psychiatry, is that the funding, medical school is extremely expensive. And a lot of the funding and grants and so on for medical school has, over the decades, has been drastically pulled back, so that fewer and fewer Black people are becoming doctors, let alone psychiatrists. I think recently there was a little blip up, but there's been a decrease. And I suspect that something similar among psychologists and social workers, although I can't say for sure. I think that the proportion goes down with the expense of the training needed to get that. So I think the gravest shortage is among psychiatrists, the next psychologists, the next, from whatever I've been able to determine, and the next social workers. And predictably, the most expensive training is doctors, and next comes psychologists, and next comes social workers. So that's part of the problem in terms of getting Black professionals, if that's helpful for you.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thanks so much.
And there was a question from Nancy about what control does the superintendent have over policing in schools? So right now, and this is a new thing, the police department now directly is under the superintendent. Before it was under the COO, but that recently got moved. The superintendent has a lot of control. So to be perfectly frank, if the superintendent wanted to, he could say, we no longer will have a police department. We will dissolve it. It doesn't exist, and it would go away. So he has that much authority to do so. The school board could also vote, but he also has the authority to do that. So we are definitely holding him accountable now that the police directly report to him. With one PA and others, there will be a lot of pressure for him to do more, because that is certainly something that he can do. Are there any other questions? I think I got all the ones in the chat. I may have missed them, so let me know. But if anybody has any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand, whatever is more comfortable. Vivian?
Unmute yourself, Vivian.
Okay, I am a retired school social worker, and I just, I'm now trying to remember what it was that somebody said earlier, but I know that there are social workers in the Pittsburgh public schools. I don't know what the ratio is in terms of students, but most schools in Allegheny County do not have school social workers. And the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work does have a home and school visitor certification program, which is, it gets a little complicated, but it, anyway, it's an excellent program, and social workers have to have that certification often in order to get hired by a district. The term home and school visitor is a little archaic. Some districts hire social workers just to check on attendance, but that really is not the role of a professional school social worker. And whoever mentioned about the ratios, yeah, 250 to 1 as ideal is certainly not great, but a whole lot better than over 2,000 to 1. And I can just attest to the, and the Allegheny Intermediate Unit, which is a separate intermediate unit from the Pittsburgh Public Schools, but they often work together to provide services to children with special needs. So that's just, I don't know if people are aware of all those things. I just thought it was important. I'm passionate about the need for school social workers because I know that they make that connection between home and school and community and resources. And Angel, I'm going to sign up at 1PA. I'm a lot older than most of the other people, but I would be more than happy to try to do what I can, because I just think it's so important to have people who understand the whole environment of a child's life. And the last school that I worked at, we were a haven for kids. I had a student once who was put out of his home. This is a child with special needs, intellectual disability, diabetes. And he was kicked out of his house in Wilkinsburg in the middle of the night. So he stayed at McDonald's till they closed. And then he walked from Wilkinsburg to Jefferson Borough. And he was sitting outside the school at 7 a.m. when the the building opened. And initially he went in and then he sort of had a fit in the cafeteria because we served breakfast to everybody. But because it was a social worker, I won't say me, there was a social worker, and I did know his history. And so he, instead of just disciplining him, he was sent to my office, and then, things went on from there. But I'll also say one other thing, and that is that the climate that the administrator in a school sets, the principal, the vice principal, that is so critical to what happens and how teachers react to a student's needs. And in our building at the time I was there, we had a principal who absolutely valued the importance of a team working together to help kids. That was his absolute priority. And it made all the difference in the world. I've worked under other people who did not have that priority. And so I just want to say that. Yeah, thank you. This is wonderful. And thanks to Angel and Gada and Dr. Cohen. You and I worked together once, many years ago, when I was at the AIU. Yeah. And so it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And you do bring up a good point about the principal setting the tone and what happens in a school and whether things are allowed or not allowed. And I know that Angel with 1PA has also put pressure on the district to try and do more training to try and teach. I mean, there's a lot of biases in the school. There is a lot of racism. There's a lot of stuff that we don't talk about or things that are ignored and things that have to be addressed in order for us to move forward. So we can't just say all teachers got into this to help students and ignore that there is still racism there. There is still biases there, and that informs the decisions that they make and whether they see a child as a threat or disruptive or disrespectful, all of those different things. So yeah, those are all very important. Thank you. I did put a link to our presentation. So if you click on it, you should be able to view it. Are there any other questions? Sandy.
Angel, you mentioned a school safety task force. Is that a district thing or that you have set up one PA?
Well, no, I don't know. I think it's so one of the recommendations was for them to create the Reimagined School Safety Working Group.
Okay.
Which they won't let me on there. They say I'm not allowed, but our members are on there, which is good.
Yeah.
So that is actually happening right now.
Okay.
And
So
Devin
at the
district, and Devin Telefero, our school board member, her and Pam are facilitating that.
Okay.
They actually wrote and passed that resolution.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Sorry, there's 2 pages. I'm trying to go back and forth to see if anyone has their hand raised, but you can unmute too if I don't see you.
And then I also put in the chat our event for the 30th. Everyone's welcome to come. And please also like us on social media.
I'd like to ask a question. Angel, you mentioned charter schools and the campaign to reducing, I believe, charter schools in the district. Can you talk a little bit more about that, how that worked and why it was important?
Yeah, so if you have, first I'll say this, because I don't want anybody yelling at me. If you have a kid in a charter school, that's fine, that's your business. That's not what the problem is. The problem is the system. So, you know, our operating budget at Pittsburgh Public Schools is about $600 million a year. We spend over $100 million a year just alone out of that budget on charter schools. So just imagine if we had $100 million to spend on supports and services, peacekeepers, restorative justice, counselors, social workers, nurses, all of those things, right? Unicorns and butterflies, but we don't. And so because, you know, the funding issue is problematic in itself. The property tax stuff, the state budget stuff is always decreasing. I mean, we had Governor Corbett who cut $1 billion from education, 8 years ago, and we are still suffering from them cuts. So, you know, we can't, if we're not increasing the education budgets and we're just taking away and expanding charter schools who often open up schools that duplicate services. We have programming in our schools that charter schools, you know, model or take and try and open up another school where they don't even take kids that have special ed or need a lot more emotional support. You know, a lot of times they'll advise you out and say, actually, we don't have those services for your kids, which is illegal, right? So it's like, you can't open up a school for the brightest, shiny, cutest kids and leave the other ones behind. And Pittsburgh Public School has to take those kids. So that's an injustice of itself. But the funding issue is more of our issue because we can't keep taking away from a pot that has holes in it, right? If you don't patch those holes, then kids at public schools will continue to suffer. So we advocate at the state level around that. The governor put out a series of charter reform bills last year that haven't gone anywhere. But it's more accountability on how charter schools operate, because a lot of charter schools are actually not doing better than public schools. And so the idea when you opened up a charter school, it's supposed to be this new, innovative, exciting curriculum, but you're doing the same thing and your kids are not excelling. So.
Okay, thanks.
sorry, when I sent it, I think there were permissions on there. So I just updated the permissions. So you should be able to click on the link now. Please let me know if you can't.
I just clicked and it works.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions, or Dr. Cohen or Angel, are there any last thoughts?
So this is Dr. Cohen. So I have a couple last thoughts, a couple specific thoughts, and then one main thought. So one is there is an initiative in the state to try to increase Black psychiatrists, and I should let you know that. I don't know how successful it will be, but there's an initiative, it's a statewide initiative. The second thing is that I saw that there's at least one Black physician on here. I don't know his specialty, but one thing I would say for professionals, physicians, psychologists, social workers, when you get a kid, and I get a lot of kids like this, that you see has been sent into the juvenile justice system because of things like they cursed the teacher, they threatened school, even if they had a tantrum. I have a problem around this violence things because when kids act out, they hit, they kick, and they spit. That's violence, right? So now, but you can, because I do this all the time, you can advocate that that kid be taken out of the juvenile justice system because it's a mental health issue and that it would be detrimental to be having it addressed. I've done that a lot and I've been successful. I don't know if it's because I'm a doctor or because I'm determined, but every time I have a kid in that situation, I advocate that they be removed from the juvenile justice system and that their problem be addressed as a mental health issue. And actually, I've been surprised at how much the juvenile justice system is willing to say, okay, you have them. So we as professionals, we can do that. And I hope that everybody who's getting kids in that situation isn't just sitting there and letting them go through the juvenile justice system. And then I wanted to end by saying, I hope everybody after this, not only you get involved, but encourage family members, friends, and other people. I've told people, yeah, you don't have kids in school, but you're a taxpayer. And I have my whole church involved, by the way. Every time one PA has something, my whole church responds by, I have them all involved because I said, you're taxpayers in the city of Pittsburgh. You don't want your taxes used to harm kids. You can still have a saying. You can still have a say, even if you don't have kids in school right now. And so all of us need to put that pressure on the school system and all of our municipalities to address these issues, to get police out of schools and to address kids' needs in a developmentally, psychologically, and caring way. All right.
I know we're almost at the end of our time. I may have missed a question. I know I addressed the one about metal detectors in the chat. There may have been another question that I missed, but if there's something I didn't answer, you can also email us. So I will include my email here. And Angel's. And you can just let us know if you have any further questions. Is there anything that you want more information about? You can certainly email us and we will let you know. But we appreciate all of you spending your Saturday morning with us. And I think that is everything. There was a survey that was posted. If you have a chance, please click on that and complete it. Angel, is there anything you wanted to say?
No, I just really hate doing these presentations like this, and hopefully this time next year, we will be able to be in person with each other.
All right, thank you all so much. Have a good morning